I come to you today to say that we can build a newer and better nation. I say we can do so, that we must do so, and that we will do so.
The 1960s were a time of change in America, as a new wave of activists were determined to make societal changes. People were taking to the streets in protest of the escalating violence of the Vietnam War. The United Farm Workers were on a grape strike in California, and Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X were speaking out, demanding civil rights. In the midst of this turbulent time period, a triumphant hero with a tragic fate would emerge. Robert Francis Kennedy was born in 1925 to the prominent and political Kennedy family. Bobby began his political career in 1952, working for the controversial Senator Joe McCarthy, who was trying to expose communists inside the U.S. government. Disagreeing with McCarthy's hostile tactics, Kennedy left the committee. A few years later, Robert Kennedy began to manage his brother's 1960 campaign for the presidency. His hard work and sleepless nights paid off, as John F. Kennedy was elected the 35th President of the United States. Robert Kennedy was appointed as U.S. Attorney General, becoming one of his brother's most loyal advisors. Politicians and citizens alike feared the merciless Attorney General as he relentlessly pursued organized crime figures. Tragically, on November 22, 1963, everything changed when President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Bobby lost his brother, his best friend, and his life's purpose. The tragic event motivated Bobby to begin his advocacy for those without a voice, growing into an influential figure that captured the spirit of the generation. In 1964, Kennedy ran for the United States Senate in New York and won. A year later, the Delano, California grape strike demanding better working conditions for farm workers began. In April 1966, Senator Kennedy went to Delano for a subcommittee hearing on the strike. Bobby listened as the Kern County Sheriff Leroy Galen testified about arresting peaceful strikers. Bobby then spoke critically.
How can you go arrest somebody if they haven't violated the law?
They're ready to violate the law. In other words,
Could I suggest in the interim period of time, in the luncheon period of time, that the sheriff and the district attorney read the Constitution of the United States?
What he did to bring attention to the injustices in the field in California were enormous. We rarely see that today. Everything in today's society, and probably since then, it's been a kind of political calculation. And in that moment, it was not about political calculations. It was about what was right.
Kennedy visited strikers on the picket line, speaking with farm worker leaders Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta. Bobby Kennedy was the first national figure who embraced the plight of the grape strikers, triumphantly bringing attention to their cause.
They just connected. It was just instantaneously. Robert Kennedy had a kind of an aspect of instinct about people who he thought were extra special, people who would make a difference, he always said. So Chavez was one of those, and I think from Chavez's point of view, in the other direction, the same thing.
In 1967, government programs that supported the war on poverty were set to expire, and in an attempt to make the nation aware of the need for continued funding, the Senate Subcommittee of Poverty held a series of hearings. One of the first witnesses that testified was Marian Wright of the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund. She declared that there was a dramatic increase in Mississippi families with no income, many of whom were now starving. Kennedy had to see the tragic severity firsthand, so on April 10, 1967, he traveled to the Mississippi Delta. What he saw shocked him. He was immersed in the tragic generations of people exploited by oppression. This was Kennedy's first real glimpse of struggle, and he concluded that, as long as there is plenty, poverty is evil.
Talking to children who had just had a little molasses to eat for the day, or a little bit of rice, the sores on their bodies, or how skinny they were, he just couldn't shake those memories. He couldn't shake what he saw, and I think that really motivated him.
Returning to Washington, D.C., he met with Secretary of Agriculture Orville Freeman, angrily criticizing inefficient food stamp programs. He demanded the subcommittee send a letter to President Johnson about the conditions of malnutrition in the Mississippi Delta, imploring him to declare an emergency. Kennedy managed to amend the renewal of the Economic Opportunity Act, calling for major job creation and food and medical programs to be established for people living in high poverty areas. Bobby continued to attack poverty issues by investigating and publicizing impoverished conditions across America. In early 1968, Cesar Chavez began a hunger strike to stop violence being used against peaceful UFW protesters. On March 10, 1968, Bobby again traveled to Delano, California to support Chavez in the struggle for justice. Thousands were in Delano to celebrate Chavez's strike. Bobby addressed the crowd, encouraging the migrant workers, and shortly thereafter joined Chavez to break bread, which ended his 25-day fast. 10 days later, on March 16, 1968, an eager and inspired Robert F. Kennedy announced his presidential campaign.
I was with Robert Kennedy on March 1968. Kennedy turned to us and said that he had decided to run for president. And so all of us were a little bit surprised. We knew he had been thinking about it for a long time. And certainly for me, it was a moment that's one of the great moments of my personal life.
Although entering the race late, Kennedy ran an aggressive campaign, and to the surprise of many, President Lyndon B. Johnson announced that he would not run for re-election. During this time, racial violence within America was escalating, and a national tragedy occurred on April 4, 1968, with the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Bobby viewed King as a courageous and prodigious leader. Only hours after he had been assassinated, he delivered a speech which captured the nation. He stepped onto a flatbed truck and spoke to a largely African American crowd in Indianapolis that was completely unaware that Reverend King had been killed. Bobby was determined to give a eulogy to inform the American people of this tragic loss.
What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another.
1 month later, Kennedy flew to California for the Democratic primary, which was an extremely critical state to win. Many believed that a win could clear his path to the presidency. After campaigning vigorously across California, Bobby won the primary on June 5, 1968, making his victory speech at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. Bobby and his supporters celebrated the triumphant win, signaling a turning point in the presidential race. It was a perfect moment for all involved in the campaign, until tragedy struck.
Senator Kennedy has been shot. Is that possible?
Robert F. Kennedy was declared dead at 1:44 a.m. on June 6, 1968. This tragic and horrific loss tore at the hearts of the people in America. The death of Bobby Kennedy left many to believe that violence could be left permanent within society. Bobby had committed himself to changing society. Despite overwhelming odds, he never gave up on this belief. Kennedy fought to put all minority groups in the national spotlight before any other politician dared to do so. His legacy continues with the Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights Organization to ensure positive change in society today. His efforts to end organized crime and bring to light the unacceptable poverty around the world remain an inspiration for present-day politicians, such as presidential 2020 candidate Beto O'Rourke. His own son, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., grandson, U.S. Representative of Massachusetts Joe Kennedy III, and former President Barack Obama.
That Bobby's legacy wasn't a devotion to one particular cause or a faith in a certain ideology, but rather it was a sensibility, a belief that in this world there is right and there is wrong, and it is our job to build our laws and our lives around recognizing the difference.
Robert Kennedy's major triumph remains his long-lasting impact on the pursuit of social justice. Tragically, Kennedy did not live to see his dream of an equal America, and today's society still struggles with discrimination. But Kennedy's dream continues to inspire people today that a better nation can be built. As he himself once said, "Tragedy is a tool for the living to gain wisdom, not a guide by which to live."